was standing on the shore. He said many things to them in parables. A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path and birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention. Consider then the parable of the farmer. Whenever people hear the word about the kingdom and don't understand it, the evil one comes and carries off what is planted in their hearts. This is the seed that was sown on the path. As for the seed that was spread on rocky ground, this refers to people who hear the word and immediately receive it joyfully. Because they have no roots, they last for only a little while. When they experience distress or abuse because of the word, they immediately fall away. As for the seed that was spread among thorny plants, this refers to those who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the false appeal of wealth choke the word, and it bears no fruit. As for what was planted on good soil, this refers to those who hear and understand and bear fruit and produce. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May God's word be spoken and God's word be heard. Amen. Please be seated. I can imagine this crowd sitting on shore and Jesus out in the boat, and they're probably asking him a lot of questions. I see today's gospel lesson as a question and answer session. And the people have just asked Jesus, why is it that some people come and sit and they hear what you have to say and they seem to get it? Somehow they get it. They hear your call to follow and they follow and they sacrifice, they pick up their cross, and they are changed by the experience. The lesson that Matthew's gospel is calling us to. Why is it some people get that? And why is it that others seem to get it for a while, but then something happens and they're not there anymore? And some people hear it the same as the rest of us, and they don't seem to get it at all. Why is that? And so Jesus says, well, here's something you're familiar with. You're familiar with planting seeds, right? And I think most of us here today are familiar with gardening, right? You put some seeds in. You hope they'll grow. You throw them out there. But some of them land on the path, and birds eat them. And others land on rocks. They can't take any root. Others land in dirt. They seem to come up right away, but maybe there are rocks underneath. So the soil is shallow, and as soon as it gets hot, they shrivel up because they can't sink their roots deep enough. You know? Others come up, but then weeds grow around them, and you can't find where they are, and they don't get enough sunlight, and so they get choked out. But then there are some that land in good soil, and they produce. And even the ones that land in good soil, some produce a lot, some produce a little. They're not all the same. And then he goes on to explain that, well, that's how it is with people. Some people hear it, but it doesn't take root in them. It gets swept away. Other people, it seems to catch on for a while, but then something happens in their life, and it chokes it out. Or they didn't go deep enough, and so when it gets hot, when the heat is turned up in their life, there isn't a deep enough go deep, and they produce. Some a lot, some a little. Now that seems pretty obvious, right? You all got that just from the reading. You didn't need me to explain that to you. But that's what Jesus is saying. But there are two other little things in this morning's gospel that I'd like to point out to you. The things that maybe we don't preach sermons about, the things that we don't really see or focus on too often. The little line in between the parable and the explanation, where Jesus says in the good old King James, "Let those who have ears to hear, hear." Now, that sounds very biblical. I think we all know that line. We think, oh yeah, that's a Bible line. Because Jesus says it more than once in the Gospels. In this translation we read this morning, it says, "Let those who have ears pay attention." It loses something in that, because that's what we usually think it means. Okay, listen up, I'm going to explain to you. Wake up now, here's the explanation of the parable. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is rather sarcastic. He's putting a little dig in there. He's saying, okay, anybody here who has ears, listen, pay attention, catch on. And who has ears? Everybody. Everybody. Now, is he really saying, some of you are like the path, or some of you are like rocks? You're going to hear the message of the gospel, but you know, you can't sink in because you're a rock. I don't think Jesus is saying that at all. He's not saying that at all. In that little line, "Let those who have ears to hear, listen," he's giving a clue to how to understand the parable. It means that you're really not like the soil. You're really not like the path or the rock. It's not just a matter of chance whether the good news of the gospel falls on ears that can hear. All ears can hear is what he's saying. You can choose to be a rock. You choose to let birds take it away from you. You choose to only go to a shallow level so that when things get hot in your life, there isn't any depth in your faith. You choose how rich the soil is. You choose how much you produce. Let those who have ears pay attention and learn the lesson. It is like falling on rocks and paths and shallow soil and rich soil. It's like weeds choking it out. But let those who have ears to hear use them and make a choice. What kind of soil are you? That's what you have control over. The gospel message is spread out like seeds. The farmer is throwing it out there. It's always being spread. But what kind of soil is it landing on? If you have ears, then listen to the parable. What kind of soil are you? Now that's a pretty heavy lesson. Again, she preached something heavy. All of the Gospels, as I've said over and over, we are in God's gymnasium. The church is God's gymnasium. We are called to be changed. There are exercises that produce this change. It is equivalent to picking up a cross and carrying it. The old self is called to die, and a new self is called to new life. That is hard work. But there's one other line in today's gospel that I want to preach on, and I have never heard anyone preach on it. And that is the opening line. Jesus went out of the house and went and sat down by the lake. How many times have you been told to go forth and do likewise? We are called, you should be laughing, people. We are called to follow Jesus and obey what he teaches, but we are also told to look at his example in the Gospels and to go forth and do likewise. I do not think it is just an aside that Matthew's Gospel says Jesus went out of the house and sat down by the lake. In this spiritual journey, where we do have a lot of hard work to do, where we do have a lot of self-dying and a self-denying to be born into a new person, there also has to be the time of modeling Jesus' example of get out of the house and go sit down by the lake. Now today's a rather humid and rainy day, so it might not be a good day to do it. But the exercise that I am going to admonish you all to do sometime this week is get out of your house and go down by this gorgeous lake that we have been and just sit. Just sit. And nurture the soil within you so that the message of the gospel can take deep root and can grow